Have you ever found yourself talking to someone who isn't even there? Discussing a situation that hasn't happened yet? Reliving a past conversation? Rehearsing responses in your head as if the person were right in front of you? Today, you will discover what does psychology say about this behavior, why does your brain do it automatically, and when might it be a sign of intelligence, creativity, or an emotional warning sign. And at the end of the video, I'll show you how to use this habit to your advantage to make better decisions, reduce anxiety, and gain more mental clarity. Subscribe to the channel now, because here you learn to understand the human mind in a simple, profound, and straightforward way. And stay until the end, because the last part can completely change the way you see your own thoughts. Let's begin. There is a profoundly human phenomenon that accompanies us from the first moments of consciousness to the last breaths of our existence, the ability to dialogue with absences. We converse mentally with people who are not physically present. We create imaginary dialogues, anticipate answers, and construct entire narratives within our minds. This practice, far from being simply a daydream or an isolated peculiarity, represents one of the most fundamental characteristics of the human experience and reveals deep layers about how we process relationships, emotions, and our own identity. When we talk to someone who isn't physically present, we are exercising an extraordinary cognitive ability that distinguishes us as a species. Our brain possesses the remarkable ability to simulate complete social interactions, creating mental representations of other people with such precision that we can predict their reactions, anticipate their words, and feel their emotions as if they were actually in front of us. This mental simulation is not merely a trick of the imagination, but a complex psychological process involving multiple brain areas working together to recreate the presence of the other person. Neuroscience shows us that when we imagine a conversation with someone, we activate many of the same brain areas that would be activated during a real interaction. The areas responsible for language, empathy, theory of mind, and emotional processing light up in our brains as if the person were truly there. This means that, on a neurological level, these imaginary conversations are genuine experiences that leave real marks on our psyche, shaping our expectations, our feelings, and even our future interactions with these people. But why do we do this? Why do we dedicate so much time and mental energy to conversing with people who aren't present? The reasons are multiple and deeply intertwined with our emotional and social needs. First, these imaginary conversations serve as a form of emotional processing. When something bothers us in a relationship, or when we want to express something important, our brain naturally begins to rehearse these conversations before they happen. We are, in essence, preparing ourselves to face difficult situations, practicing our words, anticipating objections, and trying to find the best way to communicate our thoughts and feelings. The practice of conversing with absent people also reveals much about our fundamental need to be understood. There are times when we need to express thoughts or feelings that don't find space in everyday conversations. Perhaps we have profound insights in the middle of the night when everyone is asleep. Perhaps we carry unresolved resentments or unexpressed gratitude. In these situations, creating mental dialogues with relevant people allows us to give voice to the unspoken, providing a form of emotional catharsis even without the physical presence of the other person. There is also a social rehearsal aspect to these imaginary conversations. When we anticipate an important encounter, whether it's a job interview, a necessary apology, or a declaration of love, our brain naturally begins to simulate these scenarios. We practice our words, adjust our tone, anticipate possible objections, and prepare responses. This mental rehearsal is not only useful for practical preparation, but also helps reduce anxiety, giving us a sense of control and competence before facing the real situation. However, these imaginary conversations can also become a psychological trap when they cease to be preparation or emotional processing and turn into a substitute for real communication. There are people who spend so much time mentally conversing with others that they neglect authentic interactions. They build entire relationships in their minds, attributing thoughts, feelings, and intentions to others that may not correspond to reality.
This can lead to deep misunderstandings, disappointments, and avoidable conflicts. When we create idealized or demonized versions of people in our minds and converse exclusively with these representations, we miss the opportunity to know others in their complex and contradictory humanity. The real person may be very different from the version we have mentally constructed. They may surprise us with understanding where we expected judgment, or with resistance where we anticipated agreement. Imaginary conversations, however useful they may be, can never completely replace the unpredictable, authentic, and transformative nature of real human interactions. There is a particularly delicate territory when these mental conversations involve unresolved conflicts. How often do we find ourselves mentally arguing with someone, presenting brilliant arguments, dismantling their objections, and emerging victorious from these imaginary debates? These fantasies may provide temporary satisfaction, but they often perpetuate resentment and keep us trapped in narratives of injustice or victimization. Instead of freeing us emotionally, these repetitive mental dialogues can turn into rumination, a thought pattern that psychology associates with depression and anxiety. Rumination occurs when we repeatedly revisit past situations or conversations that didn't happen, going around in mental circles without reaching resolution or learning. Unlike constructive reflection, which helps us process experiences and extract meaning, rumination keeps us stuck in the past or hypothetical futures, preventing us from fully living in the present. Recognizing the difference between these forms of internal dialogue is crucial for our mental health. On the other hand, there is a way of conversing with absences that can be profoundly healing and therapeutic. Many therapeutic approaches utilize techniques involving imaginary dialogues to facilitate emotional processing and the resolution of internal conflicts. Empty chair therapy, for example, invites clients to imagine that a significant person is sitting in an empty chair and to speak directly to them, expressing unspoken feelings and exploring relationships in new ways. This method can be extraordinarily powerful for achieving emotional closure, forgiveness, or simply deeper understanding. Writing letters to people who are not present, whether deceased, distant, or with whom we've lost contact, is another therapeutic practice that harnesses the power of imagined conversations. These letters, which are often never sent, allow for complete emotional expression without the complications or risks of real interactions. We can be completely honest, vulnerable, and authentic in ways we might not be able to if the person were actually present. The very act of articulating our thoughts and feelings in words addressed to a specific person can bring clarity, relief, and transformation. Cultures around the world recognize and honor these conversations with absences in diverse ways. Religious rituals often include practices of communicating with ancestors or deceased loved ones. Home altars, in many traditions, serve as focal points for these ongoing conversations. Prayers, meditations, and spiritual reflections are, in essence, forms of dialogue with non-physical presences, whether divine, ancestral, or universal. These cultural practices validate and structure our innate need to maintain connections that transcend the limitations of time and space. There is also a creative dimension to these imaginary conversations that should not be underestimated. Writers often report that they converse with their characters, that these fictional beings become so vivid in their minds that they develop voices of their own. Artists engage in mental dialogue with their imaginary audiences while creating. Scientists converse with absent colleagues while working on complex problems. These imaginary conversations fuel creativity, allowing us to explore ideas from multiple perspectives and refine our thinking through internal dialogue. Loneliness, an increasingly common experience in our modern society, makes these imaginary conversations even more meaningful. For isolated individuals, whether due to geographical, social, or health circumstances, mentally conversing with significant others can provide a crucial sense of connection and belonging. These conversations can be a refuge from isolation, a way to keep alive the feeling of being connected to others even when physical contact is impossible or limited. However, it's important to recognize when these mental conversations cross the line between adaptive and problematic. If someone starts confusing their imaginary conversations with real interactions, if they hear external voices instead of internal thoughts, or if these conversations begin to significantly interfere with daily functioning, it may be a sign that professional help is needed. The line between a rich internal dialogue and symptoms of more serious conditions can be subtle, and there's no shame in seeking support when needed. The phenomenon of conversing with absences also reveals something fundamental about the nature of human connection. It doesn't depend exclusively on physical proximity. We can feel deeply connected to someone on the other side of the world, or to someone who passed away years ago. We can find comfort in memories, inspiration in legacies, and guidance in passed down wisdom. This capacity to transcend physical limitations through mind and heart is one of our most beautiful and distinctly human qualities. If you've ever noticed yourself talking to yourself, simulating dialogues in your head, or talking